Once upon a time, the lovely leaders of rich countries generously gave billions of dollars to poor people living in Africa.
When people are dying, we don't believe in finding excuses. We believe in trying to do something about it.
The poor people in Africa receive $30 billion each year from the kind governments of rich countries, and they too became rich and happy. The aid they received meant the African people could see doctors when their children were sick, could drink clean water, and could send their children to school. The leaders of the rich countries felt really pleased about how generous they are.
All those countries that keep their aid promises should be proud of what they've done.
Everyone was rich and prosperous and lived happily ever after. There's another story to tell. Not one about how much we give Africa, but about how much we take. While Africa does receive under $30 billion in aid each year, $192 billion leaves the continent. Much of this goes back to rich countries. Out. $46.3 billion in multinational company profits. Out. $21 billion in debt repayments. Out. $35.3 billion in illicit financial flows. 60% of that through corporate tax evasion. Out. $6 billion through skilled workers leaving Africa. Out. $17 billion in illegal logging. Out. $1.3 billion in illegal fishing. Out. $36.6 billion as a result of climate change that Africa didn't cause. Children in Africa are 16 times more likely to die before the age of 5 than children in rich countries. In Sierra Leone, life expectancy for a child born today is 45. Africa has a shortage of 1.8 million skilled health workers. This is predicted to rise to 4.3 million in the next 20 years. $30 billion a year in aid to Africa. $192 billion out of Africa. Our political leaders are telling us only half the story about our financial relationship with Africa. Let's rewrite the story. Once upon a time, people in poor and rich countries got fed up of hearing how generous world leaders are to Africa. And they took action. To end tax havens. To tackle the looming debt crisis. To end the plundering of African resources by multinational companies. To tackle climate change. Make our leaders get their story straight. Take action today.
I think there is a fundamental misstatement of the issue in the question. We can no longer continue to make policy for ourselves, in our country, in our region, in our continent, on the basis of whatever support the Western world or France or the European Union can give us. It will not work. It has not worked, and it will not work.
There is a policy of the American government. It's called the Kissinger Report, which was produced in the mid-70s when Henry Kissinger was involved with the government. And it explicitly states, which to this day, it remains the official policy of the American government. It has not changed. It may not be implemented by Trump, but it remains the same. That the purpose of the foreign policy in Africa was to reduce the population. So to give aid to countries in Africa, not clean water and schooling and things like that, but contraception and abortion, in order to shrink the population of Africa, because they have great mineral resources there.
Our responsibility is to charter a path which is about how we can develop our nations ourselves. It is not right for a country like Ghana, 60 years after independence, to still have its health and education budgets being financed on the basis of the generosity and charity of European taxpayers. By now, we should be able to finance our basic needs ourselves. And if we're going to look at the next 60 years as a period of transition, a period whereby we can stand on our own feet, our perspective has not to be what the French taxpayer decides to do with whatever surpluses that they have in France. They're welcome. They are appreciated. Whatever interventions that the French taxpayer through their governments make to us are appreciated. We're not going to lick a gift horse in the mouth. But this continent, and with all that has happened, is still today the repository of at least 30% of the most important minerals of the world. It is a continent of vast, arable and fertile lands. It has the youngest population of any of the continents in the world. So it has the energy and the dynamism. We have seen it. These young men who are showing so much resilience and ingenuity in crossing the Sahara, finding ways to go across with rickety boats across the Mediterranean to really, those energies, we want to have those energies working inside our countries. And we're going to have those energies working in our countries if we begin to build systems that tell the young people of our country that their hopes, their opportunity are right here with us. Migration and the movement of people is being presented in a manner which suggests that somehow it's a new phenomenon. There's nothing new about it. It's as old as man, the movement of people. And it has always been linked to the same thing. The failure of where you are to provide you with an opportunity, so you move somewhere else. Those of you who are familiar with 19th century European history would know that the biggest wave of immigration in 19th century Europe, the latter part of it, came from Ireland and from Italy. Waves upon waves, generations of Italians and the Irish people left their countries to seek the American paradise, largely because Ireland was not working, Italy was not working. Today, you don't hear it. Italian young people are in Italy. Irish young people are in Ireland. We want young Africans to stay in Africa. And how are they? And it means that we have to get away from this mindset of dependence. This mindset about what can France do for us. France will do whatever it needs to do for its own sake. And when those coincide with ours, tant mieux, as the French people say. But our main responsibility as leaders, as citizens, is what we need to do to grow our own countries. What are the institutions that work, that will allow us to have good governance, to have accountable governance, to make sure that the monies that are placed at the disposal of leaders are used for the interests of the state and not for those of the leaders, to have systems that allow for accountability, that allow for diversity, that allow for people to be able to express themselves and contribute to fashioning the public will and the public interest. Our concern should be with what do we need to do in this 21st century to move Africa away from being cap in hand and begging for aid, for charity, for handouts. The African continent, when you look at its resources, should be giving monies to other places. We have huge wealth on this continent, in our own country of Ghana. And we need to have a mindset that says, we can do it. Others have done it. We can also do it. And once we have that mindset, we will see it as a liberating factor for ourselves. We keep talking about how it was that Koreans, Malaysians, Singaporeans, who got their independence at the same time as us. We're told of that at the time of Ghanaian independence, per capita Ghanaian income was higher than that of Korea. Today, Korea is part of the first world. So is Malaysia. So is Singapore. What happened? Why did they make that transition? And 60 years after independence, we are where we are. Those are the matters that should concern all of us as Africans, as Ghanaians. And not, when I say so with the greatest of respect to the French president, I think that the cooperation of France is something that I am, as you know, a strong friend of France. I am Francophile. So I don't have any difficulty with that. But I'm talking about our own propulsion. what we need to do to get our countries to work so that we can create the conditions that would allow our young people to forego this hazardous effort to get to Europe. They're not going there because they want to. They're going there because they don't believe they have any opportunities in our countries. So that should be our focus. And I believe that with that if we change that mindset of dependence, that mindset which is contingent on aid and charity, we would see that in the decades ahead of us, the full flowering of the African peoples would take place. And that new African personality that was talked about at the time of our independence will become real and imminent in our times. That's what I'm saying. I hope that I'm not upsetting the questioner or even some of my friends who are here. But these are my strongly held beliefs. And that is the reason why I've adopted as the slogan of my presidency, of my period of the Supreme Office of Ghana, that we want to build a Ghana beyond aid. A Ghana which is independent, which is self-sufficient, that is capable of standing on its own feet and building its own life. We can do it if we have the correct mindset to do so. Mr. President, those are my contributions.
There is a policy of the American government. It's called the Kissinger Report, which was produced in the mid-70s when Henry Kissinger was involved with the government. And it explicitly states, which to this day, it remains the official policy of the American government. It has not changed. It may not be implemented by Trump, but it remains the same. That the purpose of the foreign policy in Africa was to reduce the population. So to give aid to countries in Africa, not clean water and schooling and things like that, but contraception and abortion, in order to shrink the population of Africa, because they have great mineral resources there.
That sounds diabolical.
Yes.
That sounds like something conceived in the mind of Margaret Sanger.
Yeah, definitely. And so at the time, Kissinger and those involved with the Carter administration wanted to shrink the population, make sure that the Africans do not develop and do not use the resources for themselves, because we in the States, we need them. There is a concerted effort of foreign powers to control the population of Africa. Africa is a huge continent, could feed thousands more people, but the policies of the West, especially in Europe. For example, between 1990 and the year 2000, the United States, Canada, and Europe contributed about $6 billion in contraceptives, not to help the people, not to give clean water, clean food. That is
not to fight malaria, for example.
No, of course, perish the thought, never.
Yeah.
Let them die. That's the whole idea. So in our work in HLI, we denounced this reality to make the Africans aware that they have to defend themselves against the influence of foreign powers.
Is it just the United States, or do you believe that China is also playing a role in jockeying for the resources of Africa?
China is playing a major role because China is buying property in Africa. For example, in Mozambique, which is a Portuguese-speaking language country, when Portugal was in charge of Mozambique, they used to export rice. Now they are importing rice from China because they cannot produce. The socialism has wrecked the production of rice. And the Chinese come and buy farms. So about almost a third of Mozambique belongs to China. So I was in other countries of Africa, the same reality. In South Africa, the Chinese are buying property, buying land in Africa. So, and they send their own workers, the Chinese workers. They don't employ people of the place. They send their own workers to populate and to live in.